Hello, and welcome to this Foster Care Institute online training webinar, Kinship Care. I am your host, Dr. John DeGarmo, the founder and director of the Foster Care Institute. I am also the parent of 6 children. I've had the blessing of having over 60 children come through my home as a foster parent. I've had the joy of adopting 3 of those children. I also serve as a legal expert for agencies, a consultant for foster care programs, and an author and speaker traveling the world helping foster care agencies. Our goal during this Foster Care Institute training webinar is to increase your knowledge of what kinship care is. Participants will increase your awareness of what kinship care is and gain understanding of the truths of kinship care instead of the many myths, the many misconceptions that might surround kinship care. Now, before we look at what kinship care, let's have a brief reminder of the roles that foster parents have in the foster care system. And before we go further, I would encourage you to watch the Foster Care Institute training webinar, What is Foster Care?, for a thorough analysis of what foster care is. Again, briefly looking at what foster parents are, to better understand what kinship care is, we really need to know what foster parents do, what their role is. Now, foster parents, as you may know, are those people who open their homes to children from the foster care system in an attempt to help, to assist these troubled children, these children in need, these children in crisis. Now, to be sure, every state has different rules, different regulations, policies, procedures, guidelines, expectations, and laws. With 50 different states, that means there are 50 different ways, almost, of doing foster care. Every state has its own policies, its own regulations, and every state might look slightly different from one to the other. In addition to that, we also know that every state has different agencies as well. So that also means that every agency might have different policies, different practices, different rules, expectations, guidelines, and laws. So as a result, there simply could be this: over 100 different ways to do foster care in the United States. To be sure, most of those states and most of those agencies have very, very similar regulations and policies, yet it's important to keep this in mind that every state does have differences in some fashion. A foster parent, a successful foster parent, again, as you know, is one who provides a caring environment, while the birth family works on their caseload for reunification. Indeed, the end goal for foster care is that of reunification. 50% of youth in foster care or children in foster care are reunified at some point with their birth parents, and that is, again, the end goal. Does it always end happily? No, not necessarily. 20 to 30% of those who are reunified do re-enter back into foster care at some point. Foster parents not only provide a caring environment, a loving environment, but a safe and stable one, a consistent environment as well. As a foster parent, you will agree to carry out all the functions of the birth family. These functions, these day-to-day functions, they may include making sure that the child's medical needs are up to date. I recall a situation where we had 3 boys placed into our home one evening, 10-year-old, 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old, and the next day I had to enroll them into school. When I tried to do so, I found out that their medical shots were far behind. So I spent the day going from doctor to doctor trying to get their medical shots up to date so they could enroll in school. That might be one of the day-to-day functions you have as a foster parent, one of those functions that birth family has. Other functions might include making sure the child's nutritional needs are met, their educational needs are met, their parental needs are met. Foster parents are often sponsored by state child welfare programs, and these states allocate a monthly stipend to help with the cost of taking care of a child placed in the home. As noted earlier, 50 different states means 50 different ways of doing foster care, and every agency has different ways as well, different policies and practices and procedures. So the dollar amount for each child that's allocated may differ. It may differ from state to state. It may differ from agency to agency. It may differ from the child's age group bracket. It may differ for the child's needs. This daily stipend, or this monthly per diem, if you will, this money is often used to cover food, clothing, and personal allowances. Finally, as we briefly cover what foster parents do, medical care is also provided by the government. Each child that is placed into a foster care environment, each child placed into a foster care home, perhaps your home, receives a state medical card. This state medical card helps to guarantee that payment for all the medical needs, along with necessary medicines, are met. Again, you can find so much more about the roles of foster parents, along with anything in general about foster care, at the Foster Care Institute training webinar, What is Foster Care? And I would encourage you to watch that to have your questions answered. Yet this training webinar is about kinship care. What is kinship care? Now, before I became a foster parent, I believed many of the myths and misconceptions that surrounded foster care, children in foster care, foster parenting. Perhaps you believe some of those myths and misconceptions as well. Make no mistake, there are also many myths and misconceptions that surround kinship care at the same time. And the goal of this webinar is to try to dispel some of those myths and misconceptions for you. Kin is defined, according to the Webster's Dictionary, kin, the word kin, is defined as this: a group of persons of common ancestry. Again, this definition comes to us from the Webster's Dictionary, and kin is defined as a group of persons of common ancestry. Before we really dive into what kinship care is, it's important to briefly look at the history of kinship care in the United States. In 1978, kinship care became a formal part of the child welfare system in the United States. In the early 1990s, kinship care became a specific program within foster care, and it wasn't until the late 1990s more than 3/4 of children living with relatives not in an official foster care setting or program. Let me break that down a little bit for you. In the late 1990s, children, three out of 4 children who are living with their relatives, perhaps their perhaps their grandparents or aunts or uncles or older siblings, 3 out of 4 of those children living with those relatives were not in foster care, were not in the foster care system, were not placed into the foster care agency in their area. As more children are being placed into foster care in our nation, for whatever reason it might be, alongside the decrease in viable foster homes, states across the nation are also beginning at the same time to recognize that there is value in placing children with their biological family members. So in retrospect, it boils down to this: more children placed into foster care, not enough foster homes. States are recognizing We have to fix this. And there is value, significant value, in placing children with their biological family members. According to the Child Welfare Information Gateway, kinship care is defined as this, quote, full-time caring, nurturing, and protection of a child by relatives, members of their tribe or clan, godparents, step-parents, or other adults who have a family relationship to a child, end quote. And again, this comes to us from the Child Welfare Information Gateway. Falling back on the history here one more time, the U.S. Code 671, Child Welfare Systems, it states this, that the child welfare systems, in addition and alongside the courts, must make a priority of placing a child with family members first before any other option are considered. And this priority needs to be based upon the best determining factor for the child's needs. So it means this, my friend. When you get that phone call as a foster parent late at night for a placement of a child into your home, the caseworker and the agency most likely, along with the court system, most likely has looked at other options first. Options of placing the child with a biological relative of some kind. And again, the needs of the child are the biggest determining factor in that regard. If there is no viable biological family member, then the agency or the caseworker may call upon you as a potential foster parent for placement. Roughly 7.8 million children live with relatives along with their birth parents. The relative is the head of the household. So it might look like this. Perhaps a young 4-year-old boy and his 6-year-old sister are living with their parents in a home where there's another relative as the head of the household. Maybe mom and dad and the children are living with their grandparents. Or maybe mom and the children are living with the mother's sister, the aunt. Or dad is living with his brother or an uncle. Now, more than 2.5 million of these children are raised by relatives or kin without a birth parent, without mom or dad in the home. Now, when you think of kinship care, what comes to mind? It may be this. Perhaps you think of the aunts and uncles, children living with their aunts or uncles. Maybe children living with their cousins. Maybe a young child living with an older sibling. But do you know what the most common form of kinship is in the United States? Have a guess. Yes, grandparents. Grandparents are increasingly caring for the grandchildren in their home. It is the most common form of kinship care in the United States. Children living with their grandparents. It is increasing at a staggering rate. Across the United States, 2.7 million grandparents are raising their grandchildren. Since 2009, the number of children raised by their grandparents has risen by 7%. The percentage of children placed into foster care, though, at the same time, rose by 1.5% in 2013 and 3.5% in 2014. So you can see that there are more children being placed with their grandparents in the United States, or more children being raised by their grandparents in the United States than are raised in a foster care environment. Yet, contrary to popular belief, kinship care does not necessarily mean a child is living with their grandparents or living with their cousins or being placed with another relative like an older sibling or an uncle. Indeed, kinship care can also mean the child is living with a close friend of the family. Kinship care could mean a child is living with the child's teacher. And in truth, we all know this to be true, that many times the person who has the most contact with a child on a regular day. Think about it, Monday through Friday, waking hours, that child is spending time with a teacher, perhaps more than a birth parent or a biological family member. So kinship care might be a teacher. Kinship care could be anyone who has a close relationship with a child and the family, and they might be considered as a kinship placement. How are children placed in kinship? Let's examine that. Caseworkers and agencies try to work with the birth parents first in an attempt to place a child with members of the biological family members, the grandparents, the aunts, uncles, the cousins, the siblings, in a kinship type environment, in a kinship situation. So the caseworker is going to talk with the birth parent and ask the birth parent, is there a family member who may be able to care for this child during this time? Now, these kinship family members who agree to care for the child, they must agree to care for the child and follow the guidelines that the agency and the judge puts forth in regard to the child's case. We know that when a child is placed in foster care, the birth parents have certain requirements that they need to fulfill. So the kinship care has to agree to care for the child following those guidelines. Kinship family may be required to take classes and attend training in order to have the child placed in their home beforehand. If the child is placed with their grandparents or aunts or uncles or even a teacher, those kinship members, they may be required, they may be asked, they may be forced to take classes or training to have the child placed in their care. Now, a child's placed in a kinship home, there is the possibility that those kinship family members can take classes during the time the child is already in the home. In addition, if those kinship parents take those classes, it's possible it can lead to them being licensed as a foster parent. And when they become a foster parent, there may be additional benefits involved for them. It is very important to stress this. If you are a kinship family and you are considering having a child placed in your home, it's okay for you to say no to a kinship placement if you do not feel qualified, if it's not your time, if you are worn out, exhausted, if you have health concerns, it's something you don't feel is right at this time. It's okay to say no. Many times, kinship members feel that they need to say yes to that child. It's important for caseworkers and agencies to let those kinship members know that not only is it okay to say no, it is important to recognize this. Caring for a child in a home is a full-time commitment, and it is a big commitment, and it is not a decision that should be taken lightly. Because when you care for a child in your home, whether it's a child from foster care, whether it is your grandchild or your sister's child, or even your own child, it's not always easy. In fact, it can be difficult. Now, are there benefits to kinship care? There certainly are. Let's examine some of those. To begin with, the well-being of the child is often increased when a child's placed in kinship care because there is stability there. I want you to imagine this, and we've talked about this here before at the Foster Care Institute. A 7-year-old child late at night removed from the home for whatever reason it might be, taken from their mother and their father, perhaps taken from some of their siblings, their toys, their pets, their dolls, their bedroom, their house, their home, their neighborhood, their kin, their family members, their school, everything they know, late at night placed into a strange home with strange people. That is a time of anxiety because that child has questions like, why am I here? When do I go home? Did I do something wrong? Do my parents still love me? Who are these strange people caring for me? Again, that is a time of anxiety. Being placed into a foster care home, whether it's your home or my home, is a time of anxiety. So many questions abound. When a child is placed into a kinship environment, many of those questions disappear and there is stability as a result. When a child moves from foster care home to foster care home to foster care home, known as multiple displacement, disruptions can occur, to be sure. When they're placed in a kinship care, it's often fewer placement changes and disruptions will decrease as a result. As we've talked about here many times at the Foster Care Institute in a number of training webinars about school and children in foster care, kids in foster care, children in foster care are generally a year and a half, 18 months behind academically and struggle with reading and math skills. When a child goes from home to home to home and school to school to school, they fall further and further behind. When a child is placed into a kinship environment, there may not be as many school changes, which can lead to better academic performance. Now, generally, when there are fewer displacements in kinship care, relatives are more likely to support each other, to help each other out through difficult times. If a child is living with the grandparents' other family members, perhaps some of their younger children, maybe the aunts and uncles to the children placed in the grandparents' home, they can help out as well, help to support each other as well. Indeed, many children who have been in foster care have expressed that they feel much more positive about living with their kin, their relatives, than in a foster care home, and this helps to reduce the likelihood of them running away. More about running away, check out the Foster Care Institute training webinar on running away. Kinship care helps to increase permanency. Indeed, kinship care provides higher levels of permanency and helps to reduce the re-entry into foster care. As we noted earlier, 50% of children in foster care are reunified with their birth parents at some point. Of that 50%, 20 to 30% come back into care. Kinship care helps to reduce that number. Those relatives who are caring for their children are more likely to provide a permanent home through guardianship, permanency through custody, permanency even through adoption. As noted earlier, it is a time of great anxiety being placed into a foster care home. This anxiety, this trauma related to displacement, is often minimized when a child is placed into a kinship care environment. Instead, children placed with family, the loss is diminished as they can still correspond, still associate, still talk to their friends, their siblings, their members of school. They still have communication with their pets, and all their belongings are still them as well. In kinship care, families may be able to live in the same community and the same school. Family members, extended family members, can help to provide comfort for the child and share relationships with the child. Again, if the grandchild is living with the grandparents, there is still the relationship of the other family members that can help to provide comfort for them. There have been those times where children in foster care have had to be split up from their siblings. It's happened in my home, perhaps it's happened in your home. In kinship care, the likelihood of staying with their siblings is increased. Yet if those siblings are separated for whatever reason in kinship care, they have a better chance of remaining connected when placed with various family members than placed in separate foster care homes. We hear a lot about cultural identity today. When a child is placed into a kinship care environment, this kinship care helps to preserve the child's cultural identity and helps to preserve the relationship to their community of origin, their community of birth. Indeed, children in kinship care are more likely to stay connected to their extended family members, which helps them to maintain those family customs and their cultural beliefs and traditions. This is essential. This can be essential to maintaining family connections at the same time. Several studies indicate that children in kinship homes have better mental health outcomes. Indeed, children in kinship homes have close relationships with established family members, and this helps them later on in their life. Because those close relationships with established family members helps them, these children, when they become an adult, to form better positive mental health. At the same time, studies also indicate that children in kinship care have better behavior outcomes as well. Indeed, children in kinship care, 3 years after being placed in a kinship care environment, have fewer behavioral problems than being placed in a traditional foster care home. Going back to what we mentioned earlier about school, where children in foster care are generally 18 months behind academically and struggle with reading and math skills. Indeed, 55% of youth in foster care will quit school at some point. Statistically, children in foster care in school are often grim, right? The academics and behavior and graduation rates, though, may increase when a child is placed in a kinship environment than in a foster care environment. Studies also go on to indicate that those children placed in a kinship home have healthier emotional relationships with others. Children placed in kinship homes and with healthy, emotionally sustaining, committed relationships with family members, with their aunts and uncles, cousins, siblings, grandparents, they are less likely, statistically, to commit crimes or end up homeless. We've seen many, many benefits here about kinship care. It is important, in fact, it is essential to note this. When a child is placed in a kinship care environment with their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, their siblings, their cousins, maybe a teacher, a close family member, it is essential that kinship care get the support systems they need, that the support systems are in place to help these kinship families, especially those kinship family members who fall into a lower income category. Now, as a foster parent, I often state to foster parents that they need to have some type of support system, a foster parent support group, a foster parent appreciation group, whatever it may be, either at the community level, the city level, the state level, the national level. Kinship family members need the same type of support group. They need a support group. That support group might look like mentoring relationships with close relatives, with faith-based organizations, with teachers and others to help these kinship family members care for the children in the home with issues of school and education, with issues of health and diet, with financial support, and help those kinship care family members when a child might exhibit potential behavior problems. Are there concerns about kinship care? Are there potential hazards, if you will? Yes, there are a few. And let's examine briefly some of those potential concerns. Many times when a child is placed in foster care, an agency or court system might say the child cannot have contact with the birth parents for whatever reason it might be. The child placed in kinship care, though, may be more likely to experience that unwelcome or unauthorized contact with the birth parents. For you see, the grandparents or other relatives, other kinship relatives, may have difficulty telling the child, no, you can't see mommy and daddy. No, you can't talk to mommy or daddy. No, we can't have mommy and daddy come over for Christmas or holidays or birthdays. These grandparents and relatives may have difficult time telling the parents they can't have contact with the child, despite what the court might say, despite what the case plan might say, despite court order. Now, there are those instances, and it happens often, where kinship family members, the relationship between them and the birth parents of the child, it's hindered, it's hurt in some way. Because the birth parents might say, well, I want to come over and visit my child in your home. That kinship family member may have a hard time saying no. Indeed, this can hurt the whole family dynamics as a result. Many times when a child is placed into a foster care environment, foster parents are trained to not only recognize, but to assist the child, to aid the child, to help the child with behavioral challenges, with educational challenges. For those kinship family members who may not have been trained in that regard, there can be possible behavioral challenges. Those kinship family members may be unprepared for the special needs the child requires, the lack of educational and support systems. Indeed, many grandparents today in the 21st century are unfamiliar with how school works today as compared to when they went to school decades ago. As schools turn more and more to digital learning and online learning or dual enrollment, many grandparents are unfamiliar with that. And they cannot help give the child the support services they need because they don't understand how school operates during this time. A child welfare information gate noted this, that grandparents caring for their grandchildren in the kinship care are struggling with this. They're struggling with financial problems. Indeed, 1/5 of kinship grandparents have incomes that fall below poverty lines. This hinders them caring for children in their home. Many grandparents are on fixed incomes. There are those grandparents who struggle with chronic illnesses or medical issues. There are those grandparents who are simply tired because they are older. They're having a hard time caring for children who are far younger to them, children they do not understand in a society that they struggle to grasp to understand as well. Sometimes kinship families members are unable to comply to the policy that's required while caring for the child. Kinship family member have difficulty following the policy due to their personal feelings. They don't feel that they need to follow this policy because they don't necessarily agree with it. Maybe the emotional connection is there. Maybe the policy says the child cannot have contact with the birth father or birth mother or both, and the kinship family members have a disagreement with that, so they allow that relationship to continue. Maybe there are health reasons or lack of knowledge, and they're unable to comply to policy. This can be especially true in regards to discipline. For example, as foster parents, we are not allowed to have any type of physical discipline for the child. The grandparent, the aunt or uncle may feel differently. Child is living in my home. I will discipline the child how I wish. That goes in contrast to the discipline set apart by the child welfare agency. So kinship family members may be unable to comply in that fashion. They may be unable to comply with taking the child to therapy sessions or school-related issues. Now, when they do not comply to policy, this may place themselves and others in danger. It could prevent them at risk of compliance, or indeed help to prevent reunification when family members, kinship members, do not comply to the policy set forth while caring for the child in their home. To be sure, there are many requirements to become licensed as a foster parent, and that is how it should be. The requirements to become licensed as a foster parent are often very intensive, often very thorough, and can take a great deal of time. Background checks, fingerprinting, drug testing, and so much more. Kinship family members, before taking a child into their home, quite simply may be intimidated by these requirements, may be intimidated by the intensity of the training or the requirements that goes along with caring for children placed in a foster care environment. They may choose not to be held to these high standards. Kinship family members simply may not wish to have their home invaded, if you will, by a caseworker. They do not wish to have the intrusiveness that the agency brings to their home. And that may prevent them from being a kinship member. That may prevent them from caring for the relative in their home. One of the biggest question marks surrounding kinship care is this: do kinship family members get financial reimbursement? The truth is this: many states do permit reimbursement for kinship families, but this reimbursement is often less than what a foster family might make. Does this mean that all states or all kinship members are reimbursed for caring for the children in their home? No, it does not mean that at all. If you recall earlier in this training session, many grandparents are caring for their grandchildren in their home, and they're not a part of the foster care system. It's not through their foster care or child welfare agency. They're doing it on their own. Most likely, they will not be reimbursed as a result. Yet there is a different type of reimbursement, if you will. When a child is placed into a traditional foster care environment, many times the children come to the foster care home with just the clothes on their back, perhaps a few belongings, a few items in a black plastic bag. We know the story. Yet when a child is placed with family members in kinship, when the child moves out of their mother and father's home into their grandparents' home, so to speak, or another kinship, those family members have access to the child's belongings. They have access to the rest of the child's clothing, toys, school supplies, backpacks, whatever it may be. This makes it easier for the kinship family to acquire the child's belongings instead of purchasing additional items. So in this sense, it's a reimbursement in regards to they have access to the belongings and do not have to go and spend money on new clothing, money on new toys, money on school supplies and hygiene items, because they can easily sometimes go into the home and get those items. Again, it is important to stress this. When a child is placed in a kinship care environment, those kinship members, again, whether it is biological family members such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, older siblings, or a close member of the family, or even a teacher, however the kinship care looks like, it is essential that they get the support services and the help they need in order to care for those children. And when they do, when those kinship family members have the support, have the assistance, have the help, have the training, then all are helped, all are benefited. And this is not only help we help the children, we also help heal whole families. And that is the end goal of foster care, to help heal families. Now, if you are not a special member already at the Foster Care Institute, I would encourage you to sign up and become a special member so you have access to all of our online training webinars, printable certificates, free ebooks, and so much more. Of course, we have many resources available for you at the Foster Care Institute, including the best-selling book, The Foster Care Survival Guide, the essential guide for today's foster parents. And there are many books available for you at the Foster Care Institute. A book there written just for you. For much more, visit the Foster Care Institute or go to drjohndegarmofostercare.com. Follow me at on Facebook at Dr. John DeGarmo Foster Care Expert, at Twitter, Dr. John DeGarmo, LinkedIn, YouTube. Email me at drjohndegarmo@gmail.com for questions about this webinar or anything else that I can help you with. My friend, whether you are a kinship parent or a foster parent, whether you are a court-appointed special advocate or guardian ad litem, whether you are a caseworker or work for a child welfare program, whether you are an attorney or a judge, however you advocate for children in crisis, I thank you. Thank you for all that you do for children in need. You're making a difference. You are making a difference. And for that, I thank you. For the Foster Care Institute, I'm Dr. John DeGarmo.